So for anybody who doesn't know, what would you really say? What is the Wyck House? You know, as an organization, what is the Wyck House?
Well, I'll tell you what we're not. We're not a museum.
You did a great
It
job.
is a museum, but we still feel alive.
Right.
The family got here in the 1690s, and they were farmers, and we're in the Germantown section of Philadelphia, which was its own principality through those early years.
Right.
We're about 5 or 6 miles from downtown, if you can picture Philadelphia.
Yeah.
The family did live downtown and here, but once the yellow fever epidemic hit, they were here year round.
Right on.
There is no Mr. and Mrs. Wyck. They were Wisters and Haynes. The original name was Hans Mylan, and he was here in the 1690s.
Interesting.
So if we jump 6 generations to where we get to the point where we see Reuben Haynes courting and marrying Jane Bound from New York. And that's where we get the introduction of this cake mold.
Right.
I've got a quote for you. Do you want one?
Oh, I love one.
I've always said that history is in the details of daily living, not in epic battles or stirring speeches. So you see that here. They were educated and scientific and curious, but they just didn't dwell on that. And this crazy little cookie mold is just one of those things. You want to see it?
Oh, I'd love to see it, Greg.
Because you haven't seen the real one, have you?
No. So this is the one. This is the earliest example we got. Is that correct?
It is. It is. And this is the mold. When Reuben started courting Jane, she lived in Flushing, a pretty prominent Quaker family in New York. He courts her, and she moves to Philadelphia. So this is the mold that she brings with her.
Wow. That is beautiful. Now
and we don't have a date on this because it could have predated. It could predated when she brought it.
So when did those two become an item?
Like they were married in 1812.
1812. Okay, so signs are kind of pointing to a 1700s cookie press, but we don't actually know how old it was when she.
Right, there is a tradition of these molded cookies in New York with the Dutch.
Gotcha.
And they, even in our records, they're called cakes. They're not called cookies. That's a later word.
Okay.
Even my grandma's sugar cookies, the real recipe says sugar cake.
Interesting. Now, because I've gotten to taste one, I want to just kind of tangent over to that.
Gotcha.
We've talked a little bit off camera, but they reminded us more of a biscuit than a cookie. So
right.
Can you speak a little bit to kind of the palate of the person living a couple hundred years ago today? Is this something that they would have considered like a sweet treat, or was this just as part of their diet, more in the biscuit family?
Well, I mean, sugar's expensive, so let's not make this as sweet as a chocolate chip cookie.
Yeah.
But it's here. I'll fix this. Let's give them something to look at.
Oh boy, we got a prop.
Here is one of the cookies. So you see, and now that old mold I'm not allowed to use. This is a 19th century reproduction that shows up really good. I can see that in the camera. That shows up really good.
Yeah.
And this is the one that you have your mold from.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, and this doesn't go in the oven. We'll talk about the mechanics of this, but this is the cookie that's then molded on there and peeled off.
That's gorgeous.
And I don't know if you can see it. You can see it's basically flour and butter and a little bit of sugar and spices and caraway seeds. So that has a sort of savory edge on it. The seeds in there make it sort of something else, like when you said biscuit.
Yeah.
It's not dessert.
Interesting.
In the literature, it's listed as an ale cake.
So this would be something you might snack on as you conversed and drank.
Or
And
you're at the bar, you're at a tavern, you're
oh,
having a Guinness, like you're having a stout.
interesting. And that's why I say I love that history is people. That's the link that not everybody catches when they might first see that cookie or pardon me, that cake, that New Year's cake, is that this wasn't a dessert item like we might think today, but this is a group of people drinking beer, sitting, that's a totally different experience than the cookie we think of these days.
Well, and this is just, one object in a house of 10,000 objects. So when we sort of look at that, the way that this was used, it tells us a lot about history.
Yeah.
The family still gets together. This is a New Year's cake. The family still gets together and has a party that first week of January and has been making this cookie for those centuries.
Which is wild. So, I mean, we're talking hundreds of years of New Year's cakes, quite literally,
Yes.
at least 200 years, if not
Right.
more.
And when if we have another little segment, what's interesting, because we have the receipt book, we have Jane's receipt book from 1810.
Wow.
What's interesting is that every generation, it's passed from grandma to mom, and it's not always feminine. It's not just the women arts. The men's notebooks in the family also reference and make this cake.
That's so cool.
So it's passing through daughters and sons and cousins. There must be 14 or 15 different recipes for this cake in those old books that we have here.
Wow.
And it changes every generation. The science changes.
That was one of the points I wanted to hit with you today, was both the changes as they relate to both taste, but also the science, because I know there are certain ingredients that are just not commonly available anymore, that you've had to dig into the chemistry a little bit to help modernize. And I imagine that over the 200 and change years, the family had to do those modifications along the way.
Well, because the science changed.
Now, can you speak a little bit about the change in science? Like what from the first iteration and kind of moving forward, what were some of the highlights perhaps in these science?
Jane's and her mother-in-law's recipes call for potash.
Interesting. Now, what
you'd have to ask a science person what that is. It's a bicarbonate of salt something.
Okay.
That when it hits the heat of the oven, it creates little carbon dioxide bubbles and something rises.
So potash might not be commonly available now, but on a layman's terms takeaway, we're introducing gas to the cookie.
We're making a chemical reaction in the oven.
Gotcha. Okay.
So even in our books, it goes from potash to pearl ash, which was just another step further closer from the science. And then it gets a really cool crossword puzzle word. It's saleratus.
Ooh.
SALER, whatever. Saleratus. And by then you could buy it. You could buy it at the pharmacy.
Okay. Do we know what that is, or is that still before modern?
No, we know what that chemical was.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about like a bicarbonate soda. Yeah.
Okay. Right on. So
now, do you know where the next step was, though? What's in our heads that you put in a cookie?
I'm thinking baking soda or baking powder.
Baking powder.
Baking powder. Now, do we know approximately when that came online for the family?
Yeah, because it was invented in Philadelphia.
Oh, wow. Fun fact.
I'm going to guess before the Civil War.
Okay.
I could get that information.
1850.
Because all of a sudden we don't have yeast breads. We don't have yeast gingerbreads even. We've got quick breads. We've got banana bread. We've got cookies. They would have even made They would have even made like cornbread with yeast,
Oh,
not the way you and I would make it, or your mom's even made it with
huh.
baking powder and baking soda. We still get together New Year's week, make these cookies, have a party in the dining room,
That's amazing.
and relatives show up. And
Wow.
in a place that's, where we don't pick up every object, where we don't sit on every piece of furniture, that day we do.
That day, the house is a house
A
again.
house is a house. There's letters in the collection from the 70s trying to figure out how we can make more of these molds. Can we find a foundry that will make us white metal molds of this? Well, and I think the family would have been curious too. They were always the first on the block to have coal fireplaces, new science, they were curious about all of that stuff that we are today. So even in the 70s, they wanted to figure out a way how to make one of these without it being too expensive.
Yeah. No,
So along you come.
yeah,
And
man.
what's sort of fun is this, and what Riley grabs both of us is that this looking back 200 years and looking to a technology that can make all of that happen.
Yeah,
The
man.
family here would have loved the fact that we're talking about a 3D printer.
I think the part that I'm most excited about is that yes, we're going to do some work to scan the cookie press, pardon me, the cake press, and
Thank you.
a digital recreation, but we can make more and we can share them with other people, and that's the cool part. But if you can find these little tiny moments, we'll call them, that's just a term that I use with the people in my own life, these tiny moments where something is much bigger than you. If we do a good job on this and we just put it out for people to download the CAD file, somebody in Sweden or China or Norway or South America or Russia or New Zealand can just follow along an interesting story. And at the completion of the project, they'll be able to click a little download button. And the cookie press that in 1790, whatever, or 1811 or 12, when the marriage happened, came into the Wyck family, so to speak. I mean, it's going to be distributed globally as a file somebody that has a 3D printer can download and make cookies with. And there's just something about that. Like that's just cool. That like we're having a cool conversation where there's a fascinating story about the human condition, but the result of this project is going to be something that we can share, that people can actually make themselves and use in their own kitchen to make cookies. And there's something, I don't know, it just honors the entire situation. If people are using this mold to make cookies, I think that's a good thing. I don't know.
We get that totally. The family would be pleased. They'd be thrilled that the science has caught up to what we wanted to do.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Greg, thank you so much for
Oh, this was fun.
not just sharing the history, but bringing it alive, man. 'Cause
Thanks.
that's not something easily done, and the joy that you had in your heart and the passion that you spoke with really made all the difference, man. And I
Thanks.
appreciate that immensely. You know.